this is a learning event. You will hear a great deal from evaluators. We are, after all, evaluators. We deal a great amount on the numbers, the facts, the figures. But in the end, we need to go beyond facts and figures to actions. And this is going to be part of the actions that need to be taken. So what exactly do we need to do to move upwards from that 600 million and not down to the a billion possible in 15 years? One of the things that we've got to look at is looking back, what have we been doing? If we look at the World Bank Group, over the last 15 years, they've put in almost $65 billion into the energy sector. You look at the work that the African Development Bank has been doing, and we're looking at about 11 billion over the last decade. All told, we're talking about $5 billion a year going into the energy sector. And yet, we're looking at these stark numbers. So something is seriously wrong in terms of what we have been doing and what we have not been doing. Now, all of our learning events are done together with the ones who take action, which is management. And what I'm very pleased to see is, and you will see also, there's a large part of those action makers, the people who make things happen in the bank. Mr. Diallo is here, Tim is here, he'll be speaking soon after me, Alex is here. All of these colleagues are the ones who make things happen. And as Einstein said, insanity is doing things, the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. Now, we may not be Einstein, but hopefully we're not insane either. So the question then becomes, what are we learning from these actions and what do we need to do differently? I'm hoping that we have an honest and a candid discussion on what is not working and what is working. As I was looking at the evaluation work that we've been doing, we notice consistently huge delays in project implementation. In one case, I noticed the project was delayed more than 5 years. So now picture this, you're supposed to have finished a project in 5 years. It's delayed by more than the time that was originally allocated. And can you imagine, not just lost power, but all of these calculations, the money is already put out there, the project design and everything is complete. The economic rate of return lost because of those 5 years is such a huge implication on the possible benefits to the project and the beneficiaries in terms of all of the people who are supposed to be receiving this benefit. So I'm hoping we can have an honest discussion on why these things are not working. And I'm sure in the first discussion with which my good friend Marvin is going to be chairing, we'll have some of these findings coming out, what worked, what did not work, and why. The second thing I'm hoping that will happen is the role of the private sector. We've talked about almost $5 billion a year being put into the energy sector, which clearly is not enough. And President Adesina has said we're going to light up and power Africa. The question is how. The role of the private sector becomes critical. The question that I have for the panel going in there is, are PPPs enough? Are guarantees enough? What other things should we be doing to leverage and bring in additional resources? And that's some of the things that I think would be useful to see how we can go forward with. We would like to focus on is, we are here as the COP21 event is coming to a close. There's an agreement that is being reached and so on, and hopefully this will lead to much more investments in renewables. We have a good example in Lake Turkana, which was one of the high-flying projects that we have. The question then is that the only one? What did we learn from that project? How can we do more of those? And what are we doing about capitalizing and utilizing the rest of the natural resources that are available on our continent to ensure we don't go from lack of access for 600 million to almost a billion in 15 years? We are on a continent, ladies and gentlemen, where 40% of our population is less than 14 years of age. If we do not do anything, forget about demographic dividends. Not only will they be diminished, they may even be destroyed. It is an imperative for us to go forward and see what types of things we need to do, how do we need to do them differently, and I'm hoping that both Khodeja and Alex will be talking at least about what the African Development Bank intends to do going forward.
Over the next 10 years, Africa needs to install the equivalent of 800 200 megawatt power plants. 800 200 megawatt power plants. This is an average of 80 large power plants per year and is a multiple, an order of magnitude beyond what we are currently doing, what we've done in the past. We need to think way out of the box if we're going to have any chance of achieving the universal access goals in the next 10 years. We need to do what I call the 3 S's in this case, which is, that's to say, simplify, streamline, and scale. So simplify, streamline, and scale to do that.
Only 1 in 3 Africans has today access to electricity. So if Africa can take advantage of its vast wealth of renewable resources, the continent has the potential to become a leader in clean energy. The World Bank Group considers increased access to affordable power, as I said, as essential to achieving its twin goals. We are focusing on large-scale regional energy projects, such like INGA, given the transformational potential. We are also supporting transmission infrastructure and the institutional development of regional power tools to expand trade in power. The World Bank also considers the involvement of the private sector as being critical. Given the enormous demands and costs involved, private investment will be essential to close the continent's energy gap. We are therefore working closely with IFC and MEGA to attract private investment and to develop energy projects on a PPP basis.
Je suis très très content d'être ici parmi vous, d'avoir l'opportunité de parler de ce sujet aussi important pour l'Afrique. On est évidemment privilégié dans cet auditorium. On avait de la lumière. On a des... Vous pouvez m'écouter bien. L'air climatisé, c'est bon, hein? On est évidemment privilégié, mais il y a 600 millions, comme Jacques le dit, 600 millions de personnes qui n'ont pas la possibilité d'éduquer leurs enfants avec l'aide de la technologie. 600 millions de personnes qui n'ont pas la possibilité d'utiliser la technologie de pointe en matière de santé. 600 millions de personnes qui n'ont pas la possibilité de cuisiner comme vous et moi pour travailler. 600 millions de personnes qui sont frappées, pas seulement pour la pauvreté, mais aussi par l'absence d'accès à l'électricité. Nous ne pouvons pas arrêter de parler à ce sujet. Il faut parler jusqu'au moment qu'on trouve une solution. Et ça, c'est la raison pour laquelle nous sommes ici. That is the reason why we have conducted this evaluation. This situation is serious. When you are privileged, you tend to forget. Unfortunately, it's not that because we are bad or good, but we just tend to forget there are millions of other people around there. But I'm sure that this is not the case of anyone here in this auditorium. That's why you are here as well, joining us to talk about this. We have to do something about this. It is absolutely unacceptable. And there is a commitment, a world commitment to electricity for all, access to electricity for all, by 2030. I truly hope that we can make immense progress here in this region. And that's why we came here to share with you what we have learned in the bank group in over the last 15 years in this area. And we are here to share with you this result. This is the purpose of this first session. And so we have two parts in the session. First, we'll hear from Varadan Atur, the task leader of this evaluation, huge evaluation we have conducted. We'll have the presentation of Varadan Atur. As already said, he is the task leader of this major evaluation. After him, we'll have the presentation in three parts of, from management, Victoria Chisala from African Development Bank, Manager of Quality Assurance and Results Measurement on the management side. And on the evaluation side, Samir Hashen, who is Manager of the Independent the Evaluation Department here. And from Hashimi Onishi, the Principal Evaluation Officer of the Independent Development Evaluation Department as well. So with this, Varadan, would you please?
The point was that we divided all of our countries, 159 and all, into 4 groups based on their electricity access status, low, medium, high, and universal, to see how the World Bank group has been participating and supporting these countries and how the effectiveness is being reflected in these particular interventions. The global challenge is very clear, which is that it's all about Africa. We find that of the 1.2 billion that is generally seen as those without electricity globally, half of it, 600 million, is in Africa. And we also found that through our evaluation that Africa's pace of electrification is actually is not fast enough to catch up with the pace in the growth of the population, which is the reason why, as Rakesh also reminded, we will have more people if business as usual continues by 2030, more people without electricity. And the scale of financing obviously is so huge that we all need to be mindful as to where we bring this. Give a perspective of the 51 low access countries. Now we are talking about the low access country challenges. 40 of them are actually in sub-Saharan Africa, and no news to you because you live and you know this continent so much better than us. So we wanted to see how the World Bank Group itself has been performing in these low access countries. We found that actually World Bank itself was absent in 14 of these low access countries, and IFC was absent in 29 of these countries, and MEGA in another 43. And of the 65 billion that Rakesh mentioned that the bank group has supported, only 25% went to the low access countries. You would be probably thinking that where there is more need, there should be more resources and focus and attention should be flowing. And as I said, low access countries which we have defined as 0 to 50, there are many which are even below 10%, some below 25%. So the challenge is quite a huge one for the continent. To give an optical feel, the bank support to the private sector also, you can see that most of it is in the universal and the high access countries, and very little spread on the low access countries. The challenge would be therefore, how do we push or how do we make the bubbles on the low access countries wider and bigger? We looked at very quickly the performance of the World Bank Group portfolio. I will summarize this in 2 sentences. The private sector part of the portfolio performed better than the public sector, no surprise here. But mind you that the World Bank also provides support on the policy side of it. So the performance of the development policy interventions was much less compared to the infrastructure part. This has an important bearing going forward in terms of the challenges. In terms of the physical connections that we were able to achieve, even though it looks like an impressive 11 million grid connection and another 2.3 million off-grid connection, this is just about 5% of the whole low access countries that needed connections at all. So it's a huge gap that we see already in terms of the business as usual to the requirements that are needed in the future. The bank group was, in addition to the infrastructure, was also able to garner a lot of technical assistance and knowledge and capacity building in these countries. We worked with a number of global programs, and this particular evaluation, we actually did a very thorough and in-depth review of 4 of those global programs, namely the SMAP and ASTE, which are the technical assistance programs, and the GPOBA, which is the global program for output-based aid, which provided a lot of support for providing access to the poor by subsidizing the connection costs, and also the Lighting Africa that was touched upon as one of the innovative and pioneering features of off-grid electrification. The annex to our electricity access report is actually a full evaluation review of these programs. These programs were tremendously helpful for the World Bank Group as well as our donor partners in putting forward many of the early ideas and the thinking in the electricity sector and access building. I want to share with you quickly what were the successes of the World Bank in terms of the access development. Not this one. Yes. In 3 of the regions, as you can see, Sub-Saharan Africa included, South Asia and East Asia, we have had a number of countries move from low access to high, and one of them actually into the universal access in the span of 20 years. So this has happened, and in all of these countries, the bank was a major player in terms of providing assistance and advice, which means that the challenge that Sub-Saharan Africa has can be taken up, and we can meet that challenge. And therefore, what exactly needs to be done in Sub-Saharan Africa, we can get the lessons that we learned from these countries. If you can see here, the distribution of these countries are very wide, both in terms of their GDP and the per capita income, as well as on this initial status of where they started their electrification. So within 20 years, they were able to reach that. So visually, just to give a feel for the steep rise in terms of the electricity access, look at the steepness, which means that many of the Sub-Saharan African countries need to emulate and copy the examples of these countries. The important thing that we noted was that the success of these countries was that they took a very holistic approach, and all of the partners worked together. The government and all of the stakeholders worked together towards one common vision on a long-term path. So this is basically depicting that everybody needs to work together, and that's an important message for Sub-Saharan Africa and to the donor partners and private sector also. We will be hearing from our Kenyan official here, who actually did this and achieved tremendous success in the Kenyan power sector. Mr. Njoroge will be talking about it in the first panel and share with us his own experience. So I will skip the Kenya part of it, but as you can see, all of the actions and the plans are put together, and many partners are pulled together to share a common vision for the electricity sector. These are just some details of those programs. In Rwanda, they used geospatial planning to combine off-grid and grid electrification. And Rwanda's and Kenya's success in rapidly electrifying those countries in a span of 5 to 6 years is very instructive and important. we will hear from them. So I will skip this and go to what were exactly the lessons that we garnered from all of the countries that we serve. Namely that the governments need to take a leading role, and they need to show sustained commitment with a long-term vision of the sector. This is a very important message for the counterparts and the government. And we need a sector-wide program so that the long-term vision is translated into the realism of going on a 15 to 20-year horizon. And there must be financial sustainability in the sector, because this is the bedrock of making sure that private sector, which needs to provide more capital than the public sector, needs to come in, and they would like to see a very sustainable financial situation in this sector. And more important, if we want to connect the poor, we need to make sure that it is affordable, and that we need to have the mechanisms and support mechanisms to connect the poor as we build the network. These were the common themes of the lessons that we saw in all of our successful cases. Taking this, the evaluation basically comes up with a very simple set of recommendations, nothing fancy. It simply says that for the World Bank Group, probably applicable to the others, that we need to strongly focus and very aggressively pursue our support to the low access countries. And we need to move away from singular projects to a sector-wide, a unified vision where everybody shares the common goal and works with the country. And equally important, we need to help the client governments who are in the driving seat to mobilize the amount of capital, the huge capital needs that they need through an engaging sort of a strategy, so that both the private and the public sectors come together and we can enhance the capital mobilization. And of course, we also need to improve the measurement results of the project so that we know, everybody knows that what is coming out of it. We feel quite confident that these recommendations are well-founded and strategically fruitful, because we have already seen that in the World Bank Group portfolio performance itself, IFC and MEGA are doing a fantastic job on providing support to the private sector, especially in the generation, the IPPs and the PPPs. The World Bank part of it is doing a good amount of work in terms of providing countries the assistance, including on the development policy and putting together the necessary framework, providing the technical assistance and so forth. And that the experience in low access countries that I have shared with you today are also able to come together, not only for the World Bank, but for everybody else who is interested in this particular agenda to take forward their own objective. So to sum it up, as Rakesh was also saying, we have a young generation coming up in sub-Saharan Africa. And so this is a reminder again to all of us that we have to act now and we have to act fast. So the storyline or the elements are very simple. Business as usual will not work. In addition to the 3 S's that Tim put here, we need to make sure that we put speed. Speed is of the important essence here, and that governments are in the driving seat. So how do we make governments do their part? That's the biggest challenge here. I'm sure the panels will deliberate on that and also educate us on this issue. Thank you very much.
The development effectiveness reviews are prepared every year on different topics and themes. And recently we completed one on the energy sector. So I thought this was an opportunity for us to talk to you about it.
I think if we, summing up what was said at the beginning, I think if you look at the picture, where we want to be in 2030 or 2025, it's quite clear. We have a very nice picture of Africa has the potential to be leading renewable energy, clean energy, and at the same time, providing electricity to everyone. So that's the end goal. now as evaluators and practitioners, our job is to cut that picture into pieces and see what are the building blocks of doing that. And then you get into some kind of a puzzle that has to fit. So generation, access, regulatory framework, all pieces that we all know. So summing up what has been said, I will not go into detail. So we know clearly that the pieces of the puzzles today are really, really, really too small. So we have to expand all the pieces dramatically to get to any result. And that's the financing side. It has been said, I'll not go back to that. Then we know, and that's what Ajimi was saying now, that these pieces on the way, we may have to change their shapes. So we have innovation, we have things coming up, and we may need to rethink the pieces themselves so that we are becoming more efficient.
A number of things are being done, as we heard from management. Various institutions are working on this. More importantly, that it has to be done differently. And that includes innovation, as Hashimi was saying. That includes speed, as Faradan was saying. That includes strong leadership from government, as Samir was saying. And those are some of the elements of how different the approach has to be done if we want to be there by 2030, as many of our institutions have committed to doing.
We've been told that we need 160 gigawatts of new capacity by 2025. 130 million on-grid connections during this same 10-year period. And then 75 million off-grid connections. These are very large numbers. But we're also told that some countries have achieved, if not 100% of their intention in this regard, but they've gone very far in doing so. Some of them in the East Asian environment. Can we do this on the continent of Africa?
What is it that we need to do? And some of the things that I have put down as prerequisites for us to be able to bridge the gap. We may not get there, but at least we have walked down the road quite a bit. First and foremost, and it has been said by several people, the governments needs to take the lead. The governments need to be involved. Far too often, the governments in Africa have sat back and waited for the World Bank and everybody else to come and really take the lead. It is time that the governments started taking the lead. But how can we do that? The World Banks and the other DFIs have therefore the responsibility of getting the governments to take the lead, because they have a lot of voice. The World Bank and the rest of them have a lot of voice with the government, so they should use that voice to get them to take the lead. And I have examples about that. In Kenya, for instance, our geothermal program would never be where it was if the government did not, in the first instance, de-risk the projects by putting in money. We got the government to start putting money in their budget from 2004, and by 2006 they had put $330 million, and we started drilling for geothermal. So, and even Bujagari, for instance, in Uganda, if the government had not put in money, Ugandan government, it would not have happened. So I think one of the things, and I know I'm not talking in the AU in Addis Ababa, but that's really what we need to do. But I'm talking also by saying the World Bank has got an influence in that to try and get the governments to start taking the lead.
Drive innovative solutions to power generation in Cameroon. And when we talk about really doing a proper stakeholder mapping, that's what we got to understand, that we needed the government, needed the World Bank, the DFIs, and commercial banks, where for the first time in the history, by the way, of Cameroon and the Central Bank, Central Africa country, I believe in even the entire West Francophone Africa, we were able to extend a 14-year local currency facility, because that's also an element of affordable electricity, okay? With the involvement of government guarantee and World Bank guarantee. And the speed that we talk about execution, actually the speed of execution was okay, precisely because we're able to, as I said, do a proper stakeholder mapping from the beginning, and we decided to engage very actively those stakeholders who were actually driving the transaction.
energy in Africa is the priority for the institution. Okay? As far as I'm concerned, as a manager in IFC, I have all the support and resources I need to drive the energy business in Africa. And if currently I'm doing about $1 billion of business and I need to triple or quadruple it to 4 billion, I'm very confident that as the business grows, I will get the resources I need to be able to deliver on that program. The government, in terms of putting together clear regulation, clear energy policy, and a roadmap for their sectors is the most important issue. And that is where today, on my side, I find myself many times sitting at my desk, scratching my head because I'm waiting for one regulatory confirmation for a government in order to unlock several hundreds of millions of dollars that is available for a specific project. Okay. Then the other big challenge that we see is the capacity in terms of number of developers out there that are ready to embark on these projects in Africa. And again, we have a limited number of experienced developers, even on the basic thermal generation, that can execute and have the experience to do projects in Africa. If we are going to do 800, 200 megawatt projects in Africa.
At the African Development Bank, we are having a couple of programs which are just now starting. I think they really need to be reinforced now in the context of the New Deal on Energy for Africa. And one is sort of a green mini-grid market development program. We know the challenges related to mini-grids, particularly making them commercially viable or have commercially viable mini-grids. So this market development program, in a way, kind of trying to replicate what the World Bank has done with Lighting Africa on the lighting side, is trying to address several of these barriers, including access to finance, policy, quality assurance, business development support.
Innovation, I think, is going to be key. New technologies are coming up. Let's embrace them. Capacity building came up. I just wanted to share with you, while in COP, we met, many of you know Akon, the singer, who is now turned developer. One thing he said, which I really liked, because he has got his initiative of lighting, he said that they are setting up a school in Mali for capacity building, training technicians. I mean, I just found that very, very refreshing. They are doing a project of particularly solar street lighting. They have started, but on top of that, they are tackling the capacity issue. So, I mean, if we have many Akons and many of those type of people around, I think this continent could be probably very, very interesting, plus our own efforts.
We have to build momentum. We do have to build momentum and attract the international attention to move in the direction that we're all talking about here. Gathering effort, coordinating, mobilizing resources, private and public. We got to build momentum for Africa. And I think we are at a fantastic time with hope. There should be resources there. And I was very happy to hear Richard, our colleague, saying that there's no shortage of resources from private sector coming here. Everything has been said already, but three quick takeaways for me from this session. First, that it can be done. It can be done. I was actually during the 3 sessions on a roller coaster, sometimes optimistic, sometimes pessimistic because of the words of someone, but my conclusion is that according to everyone that spoke here, in general, it can be done, but we have to be realistic. And I think this word of realism was important. It can be done, but it has to be done differently. We cannot continue doing the same thing. My second takeaway is the private sector is indispensable in this struggle. And private sector resources are there, we heard, but we have to create the incentives, the right incentives. And this right incentive is back to the seat of the public sector. It's the regulator, as many said here, is the government, is leadership. My third takeaway, again, since everything has been done, has been said, is on the role of the DFIs. And it is clear that energy is a priority for all of us, for the DFIs. It was clear in the expression from every front. It was also interesting to hear this perspective from external that the role of the DFIs has to be measured not on the money that they put, but on the capacity to mobilize other resources and effort from other parties. And that the effort of the DFIs have to be focused on changing precisely the perspective within the public sector so that other resources can come in. It is also important and on the role of the DFI, the need for an integrated planning, what we call sector-wide approach, which is part of what has to be done differently going forward, and the importance of focusing on low-access countries. That's where our focus has to be. Many of us, DFIs, have been investing in other countries for other reasons. There are issues too of reliability, of quality of electricity, but there are some folks there that have no access to electricity. And the call here, again, has resonated in the sense that our focus has to be on those who have no access to electricity. And with that, Rakesh, again, my gratitude to you and to all you colleagues from the African Development Bank, to our colleagues from the World Bank Group, and to the great panelists that have been here. And obviously, my thanks to all the participants that, by the way, asked very, very relevant and great questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now comes the closing part. And I know evaluators are not very popular. And I take every opportunity, which is to step up on the popularity part. And I know I'm standing between you and lunch. So I'm going to be even less wordy here. First, lessons learned. The first lesson I take away is a practical one. And I go back to our friends in the US, where a football game is not televised unless the stadium is full. Only after the actual stadium is full are television channels allowed to actually televise a football game. That's the lesson I take away here. Unless this stadium is full, we will in the future not televise and have people be able to watch it from their rooms and the comfort of their TV screens, or in this case, their computer screens. That said, I think the discussion was indeed very rich. As Edie Okogu was pointing out, the idea was to bring in thousands of years of wisdom. And here amongst the panelists, we certainly got in that level of wisdom, which will help a great deal. The second takeaway I took was we are with a wicked problem. However, it is not intractable. So, Bachi, I like the fact that you're pointing out that, look, it has never been done before, and you're talking of 160 gigawatts in 10 years, which means so much every year and so on. But the human spirit is a strange one. Whenever it is challenged to do something, it stands up to show how it can be done. And I'm hopeful that this is exactly what will happen here today. As Alex was pointing out, we have worked in little pieces here and there, but we have never done everything together in here. And I think that spirit of partnership, hopefully, will come across in here. The point that Edie Meyer made, there is not going to be one solution fitting all. Every country is going to be different. In some places, we'll have to go with coal. in others with other forms. He was pointing out the cultural issues there. Surrounding Germany today, France is, of course, the largest user of nuclear power today. And right next door, it's just not possible. So some of these things we have to keep in mind as well as we go forward into addressing this intractable problem. And last but not least, the point that my friend here, Marvin, was making. How do we as DFIs get together? The point I think that Eddie made on the issues and the processes between DFIs themselves. We're just not harmonized. If it takes 3 months for a little piece of paper to be agreed within the central bank, we have some serious issues to look at. How then can we try and bring this level of harmonization together without necessarily being at the helicopter level and not ignoring the bottom line little details that matter? I liked very much the point that Richard was making on the underwriting part. So you get onto the underwriting and then you look at how best this can be syndicated as a big picture program in there, and something that Alex, I'm sure you'll take a look at as you prepare the next steps on how best the New Deal of Energy can be implemented. But that said, let me go back to my popularity forum and get back to food. And so, bon appétit and merci beaucoup.